I'm in. And you're in too. I see you. Okay, nice to talk to you again. Too long. It's been long. All right. Bye-bye.
Good morning.
Okay, I'm here. Testing 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly.
Okay, Jay, you're coming from Wagga Wagga.
I'm from Melbourne, actually, but yeah, that's probably what it says. Yeah, how are you? You know what's interesting? Do you say Curtis J? Do you say those two names together, or do you say your name's Curtis?
Kurt's fine. Just keep it short.
Kurt. My son, my name's Jay, obviously. My son is called Curtis.
There you go.
Morning, son.
So Jay is my pen name.
How are you, Jay? Yeah.
Very good.
Hello, everybody.
Now,
Hi,
Sam,
everyone.
I'm just going to set this up quickly. Sam, I'm going to try and make you the host.
Okay.
If I can.
He's the
So
hostess.
yes, I'm doing that. I'm doing that
Yeah.
right now. This video, this is recording, obviously. So just careful. And then so some you are now the host. I can leave and you can take care of things. Yeah.
Now, what do I have to do as a host?
Nothing really. No, nothing at all. You will have access. You can load your slides up and whatever you like, and you can share the screen. Some down the bottom, you can see. You can. So if someone else is presenting, they've got a different bank of slides. You can allow them access.
No, none of that. None of that. We won't have to do any of that.
No, okay.
So all good. This is all talk. No presentations. You know,
there
this
you
is
go.
just
You're all good to go. So when you're finished, you just close it. It automatically is recording.
Okay, man.
And then I'll make sure the recording's loaded up on the website later on.
Thank you very much, Jay. Have a good one, right?
Yeah, good luck. Take care.
Ciao.
My fish says hello.
Hey, Curtis. Anna, how are you? Long time, huh? Yeah.
Yes, it has been a long time, so glad to be here.
Yeah, Christine, nice to see you, meet you.
Hello,
and John.
good to see you.
And John is there somewhere. You can flash your video, John, if you wanted to. Yeah.
The magician, John, is here.
What's the name of your fish? What's the name of your fish, Curtis?
Nemo. Mini Nemo.
Nemo. I love Nemo. Oh, it's a cute fish.
Yeah. Got a magic wand. If we get off,
you get in trouble, we might need that, huh?
Nobody told us we were meant to bring props along.
Yes, I'm already props.
You get your glasses in the mail?
I
think I got you some green ones. Did you get them or not?
No. You should have told us that. We would have got some. Yeah. But Curtis, oh my man, he's got all this stuff. Yeah.
Well, I knew John would be showing up. I didn't want him to show me up right away. Eventually, John's going to show all of us up. But he's gone.
Yeah, well, John is an actor.
He left. Oh, he's back. Oh no.
No, John's
what
there.
Yonder lurks.
John is a professional at this. He's an actor.
He is an actor. Yeah. Anna, you've probably never met John.
No, I never met John, but I'm feeling the pressure. I'm not an actress.
Yeah.
I like your new glasses.
Thank you. The only prop I have is my pen. That's about it.
Yeah.
You've got 2 minutes to go find something.
Oh my God. Yes, I'm going to show my broken headphones. See that what happens 5 minutes before you start a seminar, you have broken headphones.
We got George. We got George online.
That was good.
Yeah.
Hey, George.
Yeah, there's George.
I got my lightsaber if we need it.
We might. Yeah.
We want to
that's George with his block. Yeah. What time is it there, Curtis, for you? Like evening,
7 o'clock.
Right?
7 o'clock, just like Anna's. It's 7 o'clock in Ohio.
PM, right? PM. Huh?
PM.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're at work or at home? Probably at home. Right?
I haven't been to work since March 11th.
Ah, so you work from the basement, right? Good, good.
Yeah, from the
Good.
man cave.
Yeah.
We got two
Uh,
Johns with us.
Ah,
Hey!
there's Charles Dickens, the man himself. Yeah.
So good to see you again, my friend.
John, is your voice muted? George, you are muted as well, I think. Can I unmute you? Yeah, George.
I'm always muted. People mute me all the time.
Okay,
Oh,
we have
yeah.
George with us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have video on the island, George?
Sorry, what?
Video.
I
So
do, but I'm trying to figure it out. Just give me a second here.
Yeah. So the only person I am waiting for is Philippa. It's probably midnight in the UK, isn't it, Christine?
It is midnight in the
Yes.
UK. She was going to come though. We emailed.
And we've got participants.
Yes,
17 of
we
them.
have. Yeah, actually, I was told there could be as many as 50 or more, 50 or more. So according to our time, we're right on to 11 o'clock Australian Eastern Standard Time. I'm at the moment in the Pacific, in Fiji, though, so I'm not in Australia.
Hi, Joe Zisk. Hi, Jennifer Park.
Can you
Hi,
hear me
Tom
now?
Reeves.
Yes, we can hear you, John.
Good. Nice to see you there, Simon, Kurt.
Yeah. And by way of introductions, John, we have Ana-Paula from Ohio and Christine from the UK.
Hello.
Yeah.
Jon Baggaley is a former, Liverpool boy, right?
Oh, yeah, that's a long time ago, but you're quite right. I was at
Yeah.
Liverpool through the 70s.
Yeah.
Do they have a statue of you up in Liverpool?
I think so, down by the poor end of the docks, I think.
The John Paul John Ringo, yeah. Now, what's George has disappeared, has he? George, are you still there?
Well, I've got my magic wand. I can bring them back.
Can you? Yeah. Well,
I see Araz is with us and Deepak is with us.
Oh yes, that's great. That's great. Yeah.
I haven't seen Deepak since Scotland a year ago.
Yeah.
My doc student, Jennifer Park.
People can flash the videos just very briefly, but we don't want too many videos because it's probably going to affect the bandwidth. Not sure about that. We'll see how we go. It is 11 o'clock my time, actually 2 minutes past, so maybe I should start because I know for some people it would be pretty odd time of the day or the night, especially in the UK. Well, greetings everyone and welcome. For those of us who are already here, I'm hoping many more will join over the next 90 minutes. And I hope all of us who have joined can stay with us for the 90 minutes. This is a webinar that we at the Open Distance Learning Association of Australia have gotten in the habit of sort of organizing based on publications of the journal. My name is Som Naidu. Many of you will know me, some of you will not. I'm the executive editor of the journal and a former president of the Open and Distance Learning Association of Australia. First of all, let me welcome you all and thank you all for making the time available today or tonight. It's okay for you to flash your video on for a little for a second or two so people can see if you want to have your face seen. But it might be a good idea if we, apart from the panelists, we turn the videos off of all the other people so we don't need to have too much bandwidth. The chat session is open, so you can have a conversation personally or with the group as you go along. And I will try and also monitor the chat session. So I see you've already started. There are questions and queries or suggestions along the line. Please post them there. If I grab my attention, I will speak to them. Now, we are talking about the fourth issue of volume 41 of the DE Journal, which has just gone to press. The print copy is, I think, already in the mail or just about to go into the mail, but the online version has been out for a while. This is not a special issue, but it seemed like a special issue, and it is a general issue. But when I was thinking about preparing and talking to people, a couple of colleagues from Western Australia suggested, what is the journal doing about the COVID crisis? So I went to my usual suspects, the panelists included, and asked them to see if they had some suggestions or ideas or things that they would want to reflect on. And all of you were very keen to do so. I'm grateful in very short time that you were able to generate some thoughtful pieces. So these reflections are published in this issue. So when I started thinking and working with the panelists on these reflections, obviously there were other articles in the journal. As you will know by now, there's 7 articles that were not intended to direct attention to the COVID crisis or the crisis posed by COVID-19. There are 3 really reflective pieces and a book review which was in the mix. But when I was putting together the issue and working with you guys, it became clear to me that we are really in the midst of really the worst of times, but at the same time the best of times. So I'm leaning on Charles Dickens here, and I'm so delighted that Jon Baggaley is here with us, because when I was a graduate student in Montreal, where Jon Baggaley was a professor at that time, I think it would have been 1988 or 89. John, you can remind us. Jon Baggaley did an imitation of Charles Dickens, and do you remember that, John? And
Yes.
And so you can talk to us about that. He looks like Charles Dickens, doesn't he? With a bit more gray than Charles' caricature head at that time. But where I started thinking, and I thought, oh, what an apt sort of metaphor or analogy there. So I started to write this paragraph, which I'd like to read for the benefit of those other people in the forum, in the webinar. Thanks to the feedback from Curtins and other people who helped me craft this paragraph. For many of us with affection for the machinery of conventional campus-based education, this could be the worst of times. This is the worst of times. And those of us who are familiar with locales like Melbourne and Manchester, the classic mile in Manchester and the Swanston Street in Melbourne will know that the COVID pandemic has caused the disruption of entire education ecosystem, not just the universities, but everything that dwells around the universities, including university accommodation, student accommodation, cafeterias, and coffee shops where students hang out. So economies and businesses that have thrived on the education industry in places like that, hubs like that, are in turmoil. And I know, for one, as a resident of Melbourne, real estate, for example, around the universities are being affected and may never recover. So vanguards of the campus-based education experience like Melbourne University, Cambridge, and Yale, which have thrived on the age-old traditions and the reputations of small group teaching, Cambridge University, for example, in particular, in Oxford and Melbourne, announced that they are locking up and taking their learning and teaching operations online. As a result, almost overnight, students have had to go online. And Curtis was just saying that he's never been to work, or not working from work, since
Never
March.
work.
Yeah. and parents, this is the interesting part, and parents have had to become tutors. You know, this brings into the question of this homeschooling thing that we have been very critical about, some of us have been. And while they themselves work from home, and it has brought a different set of stresses and brought into light the role of schooling. You know, what is the role of schooling? Is it just about education, or some people have argued that it's also about childcare? Questions and criticisms about the veracity of or the strength of open and distance education, which we have been arguing endlessly about for the decades, are no longer questionable. People are jumping into it blindfolded. So the question then we are posing to ourselves is, as George put it very eloquently, how should we respond to these challenges? And that's the point of this webinar. So what I want to do here is, I don't want each one of us to go about presenting what they've talked about in the reflections and the papers, at least those amongst the panelists here. I have a bunch of questions, but before I do get to the questions, I do want to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about what you have written in the issue. Otherwise, you know, that will not get to the attention of several of our people who are in this webinar. So I want to begin by giving.
Before you ask those questions, I have a question for you. You forgot to mention how long you've been the editor of this journal. It's on volume 41. How many years have you been the editor? My fish has been asking me this question for a couple minutes now. So how long has it been?
There's a quick digression. I started in 1997. So what does it make? 22, 23 years? I don't know.
23 years. We should all give him a round of applause right now.
Yeah. It's an interesting one, because the guys who started this journal, and while we're giving credits, you know, Ian Mitchell and Desmond Keegan, as you know, these guys actually started the journal in 1979. And in 1987, it was, I was working with Ian Mitchell, who was just about to retire at the University of Southern Queensland in Queensland, Australia. And he handed over the reins to me, and my God, what a ride have I had, you know. I'm grateful for the opportunity. A journal is a lot of work, and unfortunately, academia doesn't appreciate that all the time, most of the time, in promotions and other kinds of criteria. Welcome, Philippa. How are you? She's joined us, but it is a great opportunity to actually shape the field, influence the field, serious contribution. So I hope that many of you will join me, and you're already in it, but become more active participants in the work of the journal. But we'll come to that. Thanks, Curtis, for reminding that. But let me stop talking. I've gone on for 10 minutes. I want to hand over. I'll give over, say, about 2 to 3 minutes, or at the most 5 minutes to each one of you, to talk a little bit about yourselves, and also some of the key things that you have articulated in your contributions to this, to the fourth issue of volume 41, as Curtis was saying. So can I start with George, because you are number one on my list, George?
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the invitation, Som. Thanks for making time and space for us to have this conversation. It's always a pleasure, always fun to be here, meet new people, see friends, and chat with colleagues. So in this issue, I wrote a short reflection called "How Should We Respond to the Life-Altering Crises That Education is Facing?" And it's very short. It's, I don't know, less than 2,000 words, I guess. Essentially trying to put together a number of thoughts I had over the last few months, and based on the work that I've been doing around online and flexible learning over the last few years. I should preface all this by saying that I'm at Railroads University, which is in Victoria, British Columbia, on Vancouver Island, which I understand Jon is also just a few miles north of me. And I have been in the field for a few years now. And my work has always looked at trying to make sense of student and faculty experiences with emerging forms of teaching and learning. And it's been interesting, I suppose, to say the least, to see all of our systems being thrust in emerging forms of teaching and learning over the last few months. Emerging for many people, but for some of us, it's been work that we've been doing for many, many years. So in this article, I essentially argue that one of the ways that we should approach this new environment that we are in is by looking backwards, consulting the history and the literature of the field, which I think is an argument that a number of you have also made in similar pieces. Another approach would be to be more public with our work and engage in public and network scholarship, engaging with people that might not necessarily know the work that we do, but might be in need of it, such as teachers, policymakers, and so on. And finally, engaging in more sort of speculative work about what the future should be like. A lot of our work examines how things are and how things are in classrooms, in online spaces, and so on. But beyond the sort of optimistic, what is the potential of technology kind of work, which I think is highly problematic, we often fail to pause and say, well, what should the future look like? What will get us there? And how should we design our current environments to look like things that we aspire for them to look like? So in short, that's what this piece tries to do. It's supposed to encourage people to do that kind of speculative work.
Thanks, George. I'm sure we'll come back to some of those ideas in more detail later. Jon, over to you, man.
Thank you, Sam. And even before Kurt applauded you just now, I was going to issue a special word of thanks to you for the powerful job of work you've done for so many years for this field of distance education, including setting up this rare opportunity to see people in Australia and England. And isn't it typical that people like you and me and Kurt, who live so far apart, we get to meet each other more often than two people like George and me who live just a couple of miles away, well, 2 hours drive. And I don't think we've ever met in person, George, have we? But we must work on that. So thank you for the invitation to this session, Sam. I'll just update my paper. I wrote it in July. And I had a dismal prophecy to make, rather like Charles Dickens used to have in talking about Victorian society at its very lowest levels. I've written in my article that that the COVID crisis has caused an unruly scramble by teachers and parents to master distance education. Online learning methods specifically, which the institutions they belong to and their children attend as students have denied for so long. The mainstream educational institutions have, by and large, little or no experience with online learning, and suddenly they were given a matter of weeks in order to get it together. And we only have to Google for remote learning complaints to see that my Dickensian prophecy about the worst of times coming is coming true, has rapidly come true. It began even before the term began, as parents and teachers tried hard to master the online learning methods and failed, because you can't just do it like that overnight when you have no experience of it. There is more experience exhibited by yourself and the others who set up this session today in getting an online meeting working right and moderated right than there ever will be in a matter of weeks when all the teaching staff of a university are instructed to move their courses online. So in the last week alone, I've heard two examples, two comments on national television, which bear out this conclusion that the worst of times is already happening for distance education. Very well respected TV journalist Chris Cuomo on CNN recently exclaimed, "Remote learning is crap." Now, I assume that is not from his experience as a journalist researcher, but from his experience as a teacher, a parent who is trying hard to teach his children to use the online media and to master it with them as they begin to take their courses online. Another comment was made last week by Bill Gates in saying that it may take 3 years to get good at this with a concentrated effort. But in that time, we will achieve the equivalent of 10 years of normal practice. Well, that's not good enough, is it? What he's saying is putting a positive spin on the idea that in 3 years' time, we just might have mastered this medium, having never tried it before, 99% of us. But that's no good for the students of today, who are already, no doubt, suffering all manner of cobbled together online alternatives to their face-to-face courses. Now, who's going to accept the blame for failure to create good on-learning in a matter of weeks? So it's certainly not the mainstream institutions that have been responsible for putting these courses together, probably by and large poorly, owing to their previous denial of and inexperience with online learning. It's the distance education field in general which will take the blame, and that's what my article is about. It's us who will be accused of being inefficient. The field, by its very nature, will be accused in the time that follows the pandemic crisis of never being good enough for mainstream researchers to use, mainstream educators to use. And yet, distance people such as ourselves who worked in distance education online and otherwise for many years know that the lessons of over half a century need to be preserved. And how is that to be done? And I think that's well expressed as a topic for this webinar, Sam. How are we to react as a professional group in order to help change this worst of times to a future best of times? I think the first thing we must realize that writing articles such as we have done in the current edition of the journal is not good enough, because those people who are now going to be blaming us in a few years for having a poor field for them to use in mainstream education, they don't read our journals. They don't read the distance education journals. We have to find other strategies. This can be a good medium for bringing us together as professionals in the field of online education, but it's never going to replace other techniques which are more strategic. And I can think of the 15 years I taught in distance education, a big issue was creating a standard approach for the University of Athabasca's courses, which was efficient and which all departments and all teachers could use. But that's a very political issue. No academics want to, they welcome the idea of being evaluated from within the institution, let alone from without it. So how are we going to come up with a strategy that guarantees that the courses that are now tumbled online will work. I think we must not forget that the major evidence for the fact that these courses aren't working will be the students and the parents. I think they have to know that there is some sort of complaint avenue for them to use when courses, either individually or in general, are not working. If the administration of the institution doesn't learn of these facts, they're probably not going to do anything. They're just going to go along blithely with the idea that everything is working until it falls apart, and then they blame distance education as having been inadequate all along. So I think there are various strategies that should be used, and I've listed some of those in the article I wrote. And I thank you for inviting us all to write at this difficult time, Sam.
Thank you, John. There's tons there that I'm sure will resonate with the contributions that Philippa and Curtis and Christine had mentioned. But because I was making those connections in my head while you were just saying. But I'm sure we'll be coming to that. Now, let me go to Curtis now. Curtis, over to you, man.
Kurt's fallen asleep.
3 gentlemen in a row. We need to go to 3 ladies now before I speak. Otherwise, we'd have 4 gentlemen speaking in a row, and that'd be totally wrong and inappropriate. So.
Okay. Well, Anna is next on my list. I mean, I wasn't particularly going by any kind of order. So go for it, Ana.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ana-Paula Correia, and I'm an associate professor in learning technologies at the Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio. So it's 7:30 p.m. and I'm so happy to be here and to try to share my stories and my experience with the group and learn from you. That's the most important. The story
Anna,
behind...
can I add that you are an outstanding alum of our program in Indiana and just moved a little bit east out to get back towards Portugal, I think,
Yes, that's a long story. I don't want to go that back. Our article is named, is titled Evaluating Video Conferencing Systems for the Quality of the Education Experience. I think for us, and we wrote this article as a collaborative effort with my doctoral students, Chenchi Liu and Fan Chu. And it was March or maybe, yeah, it was March, and we were working from home and studying from home and running our life from home. And we had this a conference call just like this one. Maybe this is too much information, but I think it's important to share the story. And we were safe, we were well, and we thought, what can we do to support people in these situations? So we thought, okay, video conferencing systems are now turning into an alternative to mimic the face-to-face interactions that teachers have with the students. So maybe we could start there and look at how video conference systems characteristics and features can support or not teachers and students in a situation that they cannot meet in a physical space. So there was the motivation, and we just started and we worked at a distance on this article. We decided to conduct an analytical evaluation because we could not recruit participants to test usability of the 4 video conferencing systems we select, because we were in the midst of a pandemic and social distancing was a requirement, and we wanted to keep ourselves safe in our homes, but in connection with each other. So we conduct this analysis and we look at 4 widely used video conferencing systems: Zoom, of course, WhatsApp, it's very popular on mobile devices, Microsoft Teams, and Skype. And we explain on our article why we select these four, and I don't want to get into that detail. But I think what was important for us, and when you write something and when you conduct a study, when you write an article, you also learn from that journey. So I think, and I want to just end my introduction with what we've learned from this study, was that we learn about what the next generation of video conferencing systems should look like when we're supporting teachers and learners and when we were working in the educational context. So that was our last section, and we made some recommendations on, or at least our insights on how that next generation of video conferencing systems is going to look like, is already liking, because Zoom is already evolving into augmented features like video and backgrounds, filters, and work on image quality and audio quality. And that's me in a nutshell. I'm glad to talk more later. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. Sure, of course, yes. Christine and Philippa, thank you very much for being awake at this ungodly hour, godly hour, whichever way you want to look at it. But Christine, how about you go first?
Okay, well, I'm Christine Pleines. I'm in the UK, in London here, so it is midnight. And I work at the Open University, which is the big distance university in the UK, where we've been offering distance learning for many, many years. And in the article which I published in this particular edition is called Understanding Vicarious Participation in Online Language Learning. I have to say I work at the Department for Languages and Applied Linguistics, where I develop courses for online language learning. And I think my main argument is that online environments offer lots of opportunities for participation, for example, as described by Anna just now, but they also offer opportunities for engaging vicariously. And I specifically also study, as others here too, synchronous online tutorials, synchronous online group tutorials. And I've studied them long before COVID times, and they've been running at the Open University for 20 years now. But now, of course, they are everywhere. They are everywhere. And I was interested because those small group tutorials are mostly aimed at direct interaction and participation, whether students would also learn from accessing in retrospect. So you can turn all these synchronous tutorials also into an asynchronous resource by recording them. And students participate vicariously, and they access the interactions the other students have with each other, with the tutor, and basically the sort of tutorial dialogue that's going on in these tutorials. And I find that students, by combining different modes of tutorials, so accessing directly live, but also accessing recordings in retrospect, report many benefits which are cognitive, which are social, and which are motivational. And I think that is, and I did this study in pre-COVID times, but I think it has now become additionally relevant. And I think especially if we are trying to be a little bit optimistic and think that one day institutions will actually, rather than just rush to move all their learning online, will try to think about how they can combine different elements of online learning, that they might want to start thinking about how they can try to combine these opportunities for direct and also for indirect participation in the online environment.
Yeah, excellent. That's exactly what I thought, Christine. And when I was, I needed to mention that both you and Philippa, your contributions were done before the COVID crisis. So, but it's amazing how the relevance, I could see the relevance, and that's how I made the connection. It's become even more potent now. Philippa?
Hi, everyone. I'm Philippa Waterhouse, also from the Open University. Apologies for joining late. I was ironically having technical issues. I think I joined the participants rather than the panels side of things. So for the first 10 minutes, I was sort of trying to get my video to work and my sound to work, but all is okay now. So my paper was looking at the mental distress of distance educational students and the importance of their work and family roles. So as Som mentioned, we conducted this research pre-COVID, but I think the topic has relevance in this discussion about COVID-19 and how it's affecting education. So one thing I can think of is COVID-19, it's argued, is permanently changing the workplace. So for example, people are moving to remote home working in the longer term, or using a hybrid approach to hot desking and going into the office. So I think what that means for some of our distance educational students, their sort of wider life circumstances are changing, and this might affect how they are managing and balancing their work and family roles around their studying. And working at home, for example, can be quite isolating and have, you know, implications for being socially connected, which has links to our mental well-being, and that can then have further impacts on our students and their studies. So while my research was conducted pre-COVID-19, I think work, family, study roles and students' management of them is important in these discussions.
Love your work, Philippa, and I've got another paper from your team, you know, that I'm looking at right now for the future. So that's interesting work. Curtis, over to you, mate. Last man down.
Okay, I want to say thank you to my book colleagues who've joined us. Tom Reeves, who's done 3 MOOCs books with me, and his football team is still ranked number 4 despite tripping over their feet 47 times this weekend. And I also want to thank my colleague Elaine Coe, who did a free book on motivation and retention online called Adding Tech Variety. I put the link in there. Elaine, you might want to type it in again for people. You can download that free book in Chinese or English, and soon Arabic, I hope. And people are working on Spanish and other things. I'll see Sharonika, who is going to have a book launching. I did the preface for Sam and Sharonika's book on open educational practices in Sri Lanka. She's also a panelist. And my next book with Fulbright teachers, I am writing the book proposal on, and I'll be doing that with Mina Ju, who's in the audience too. So a lot of people are here who I recognize from various things.
Yeah.
I want to also mention, with this pandemic, I've started a weekly webcast show called Silver Lining for Learning that I'm doing with Chris Dede from Harvard, Young Zhao from Kansas, Punya Mishra, the TPAC guy from Arizona State, and Scott McLeod. So every Saturday at 5:30 p.m., Silver Lining for Learning, just look that up. My piece is called Pandemic Ponderings. I had to come up with a catchy phrase after reading John's paper and knowing I don't want John to outdo me too badly. So Pandemic Ponderings, 30 years to today, synchronous signals, saviors, or survivors. So in effect, I talk about the fact that synchronous can mean many things to many people, and right now it does. There are some people who simply are finding out that it's just saving them from their program. It saves their programs. Students can enroll in classes and they can take certain classes. It is in fact saving our jobs in many ways. But in other cases, they're simply surviving. They're in survival mode. Just give me the next day. Let me get through this. I don't want to think too much. I'm just going to dump everything the way I've been teaching it in the past. And that's the way I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it next week. And I'm not going to think at all about it. I'm just going to dump it and say, thank you, God, that this exists. So it's a savior. We're surviving. But then it's a signal. Synchronous can be a signal for something different, something better, hopefully. And can mean a different thing for different people. For administrators, it could be a signal on where to appropriate your funding in the future, what to focus on, how to allocate and train teachers and educate staff and create systemic change in your university. For graduate students, it could be a signal that you need to think about possibly conducting a study like Anna just did. Brilliant paper, Anna. I read it this afternoon as I sent you an email on. It's the best paper on video conferencing I've ever read. the analysis scheme was spot on and very, it's extremely interesting. It's a long paper. It's a lot of appendices, and you'll learn a heck of a lot from read the appendices. Well, maybe read them last. Save the best for last. They're really good. And so, you know, I've been exploring this field since 1990. My first graduate student at West Virginia, her name was Padma Maduri, and she arrived in 1989, and so did I. And we worked on looking at 30, 40 different packages for collaborative writing. And so I talk about how those packages evolved into the LMSs that we see today, evolved into the team like Google Meet and Microsoft Teams and Skype and Zoom and WebEx and Placeware and Live Meeting and all the other things that we've seen over the time. So it's I kind of wrote a historical piece because I read Jon's piece first. It was really helpful reading Jon's article because it situated my brain in an historical context. And I wanted to take a similar approach. And so the piece sort of evolved. And like Anna's piece, I talk about in the 1990s, video conferencing exploding and what people were doing, in my case, combining See You, See Me and PictureTell to bring in experts from around the world into my classes. But more recently, I just went through a lot of the articles in Inside Higher Ed, in the Chronicle of Higher Ed that had to do with Zoom. And in George's piece in The Conversation that talked about being effective online teacher. And Stephen Mintz's piece about being active and engaging in learning. There are a ton of news pieces out there, whether it is The Guardian or The Conversation or The Evolution in Canada with 3 L's in it, or the Chronicle of Higher Ed or Inside Higher Ed. Tons of people providing support. There are a lot of people who care about what was happening this fall. That was obvious in my reading. And George was among them who said, hey, here's 7 things you can do. Or maybe it was 10 things, George. Was it 7? And these are good practices, according to George. And if you haven't read George's work, he's one of the most prolific people in the planet. He should have been my grad student, but that's another story. He almost came this close. But so in the middle of the piece, I take a questioning approach, a what and a why, which Sam wanted me to start with. I put it sort of in the middle. I asked the questions about why is there a struggle? Everyone was assuming, you read Doug Lederman in Inside Higher Ed, he said there was a struggle. Well, not everybody struggled with this. For not everyone was it a pivot. Everyone talked about this gigantic pivot that happened. And for those of us teaching in fully online for 30 years or 20 years, there's no pivot at all. There was no struggle at all. In fact, the timing of COVID was ideal. It happened in week 9, which means that you met your students for 9 weeks and you got to know each other and you had 6 weeks that went online. It almost could become a model of the future. That might be the ideal way to teach. Meet for a while and then go online for the other half of the semester. I don't know why people are so, and they had remote, I like this, what Jon's talking about, remote emergency teaching, as if distance learning is some kind of national emergency or tragedy. You're ready to be awful. You're calling it, in emergency mode. So there is no pivot in my case. There was no struggle. Why is there a struggle? Tom Reeves read an early version of the paper and he said, what's not happening here is acknowledgement of best pedagogical practices. And you might want to pick up Michael Sharple's book, Practical Pedagogy, 40 Ways to Teach and Learn, that just came out with Routledge this year. It's a great book. He goes through all sorts of pedagogical activities and methods in here in a short fashion. And it's a fascinating book. And Michael's one of the foremost leaders in the field of educational technology. He knows everything. He's a Renaissance man. I mean, he really is. You get this book. So, distance learning doesn't need to be inferior. In fact, in many ways, you can be more creative. You can be, the world is at your fingertips for bringing in guests. Guests from around the world can come in any time. I'm gonna have to bring Jon in, by the way. I brought George into my class. I need to bring Anna in. I'm not sure if I have in the past, but So, you have so many opportunities in front of you that distance learning is not this inferior thing. It's not this dangerous remote vehicle. And everyone is not suffering. And so we have to break people's mindsets, first of all, and admit that there are things that need improvement as well, in particular, awareness, training, and other kinds of things. But a lot of the articles talk about teachers in K-12 playing silly games. Now, I don't know why people would play silly games to get attention, all of a sudden for folks, or like sabers in or whatever they have to, do that for engagement. There are many other ways with breakout meeting rooms and polling and other kinds of things that you can do. I also pose the question about what is the next phase? And I think Anna, in her article, ends with this notion of what is the next phase? Where are we going with all of this? So instead of looking negatively backwards, we should look positively forwards of what we're going to be providing, what we can provide in this field, because there will be more online and blended learning that will be taking place in the future. Sam's going to be asking us some questions, but one definite prediction that all of us probably will shake our heads yes is we're not going to go back to the way things were in 100% to the way things are, maybe 50%, maybe 60%, it'll go back, maybe 70%, but this is going to cause a large percentage of the world to continue to experiment with online, to continue to experiment with new forms of collaboration with other institutions, and new forms of assessments that need to take place if you do move to an online environment. So the time is ripe now to get the foundations like Gates to think about funding best practice kinds of things and training approaches and other things. The time is right now for educators to experiment with their pedagogy. The time is right now for administrators to think about their funding. The time is right now for students, grad students and their advisors to research and write white papers and other kinds of things. So that's the way I peg it. We can have a conversation about it. There's a lot going on, which makes me excited. And I'm really glad that Distance Ed has this opportunity to write reflection papers, to bring people like John and George and Ringo and Paul in and to write their various reflection pieces. So I'll end with a little Beatles thing, since John is from Liverpool and the statue is there somewhere on the Poor People's Dock. But Sam?
Thank you, Curtis. Thank you very much, man. Just what I expected from all of you. Listen, I mean, I'm very cognizant of the fact that, I think a journal is not just an outlet for people to publish articles if you're not going to have a conversation about it. And without your permission, I did take the liberty to share your draft pieces in confidence, of course, and I can see the benefits of that. So I see that a journal is a place of scholarship and the promotion of scholarship, which is what I think we're all trying to do. In particular, I'm trying to do. Now, listen, I have a bunch of questions, but I thought rather than go through those routine questions, I'm seeing very exciting questions coming up both in the Q&A and in the chat session. So I think, it might be a good idea to have a look at that, because these are coming from people who are participants. And if we have room, we can go back to the questions that I have got, but many of them are probably picked up by other people. I'm looking at the Q&A, and there's two questions in Q&A. If the panelists can have a look at that as well. The first one, both of them are from Philip. They're saying, firstly, congratulations and my thanks for having this wonderful webinar. Okay, that's not a question. Now my question. In light of COVID, should the formula for university world rankings be amended to incorporate assessment of the level of digital student support mechanisms offered? Have institutions done enough to ensure students have connectivity to enable them to access their courses? Great questions, and I'm sure you'll have bucket loads to say about world rankings and institutional policies and plans. Can I suggest that we have a go at these questions first? Is anybody going to take a shot at it? One of the panelists?
I'll have a quick go, Sam. I think that would be a very good idea. I believe my colleague Deborah, former colleague from Athabasca, is with us. I wonder if she will agree with that. That I don't believe that universities, open and online universities like Athabasca, have ever had their online skills acknowledged in international university rating systems. Over the last years, I may not have been quite so much in touch with that. Deborah might correct me if she's there, but I don't think Athabasca University even appears in the Canadian university rankings. But to actually create a method such as that for recognizing the level of online curricular skill within an institution would be a powerful way of getting the message out, and I would agree with that idea.
Yeah, go ahead, George.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks, John, for that reflection. I think that this is a sort of question that would be worthy of our reflection in sort of developing the future that we want, because university world rankings, as I understand them currently, aren't necessarily focused on ranking our institutions in terms of how well they do in terms of teaching, on how well they do in terms of equity, on how well they do in terms of pedagogical innovation. So if the question is asking, how do we design a system to rank institutions according to these really valuable, equitable seeking approaches, what are the indicators for that? And incorporating something like, support systems, responsiveness, pedagogical innovation, and so on, I think rises to a level of what rankings would actually be useful for compared to what they are now, which are an exercise in not quite sure what, but definitely not in terms of valuing the kind of teaching and learning that happens at our institutions.
Yeah, I'm also looking at the chat to see if there's questions there that we should respond to. I think Philip is the same one he posted on chat. I know Deborah's there from Athabasca. If there are people outside the panel members who would like to say something, just go ahead. I would say, I don't want to stop you from talking or making a contribution. Yeah. Okay. Right. Well, since there's a bit of quiet, so maybe I should go to the questions that I have posed there. Let me have a look at the questions that I did post. The first one was looking at the lay of the land, like I was suggesting in my preamble, that mostly all universities or institutions of education are being impacted, and there are a variety of these impacts. And as Curtins and I are both on the same page, people are talking about pivot and those sorts of things. I wanted to sort of us to reflect on the kinds of things that you think, or let's say, for example, in 2021, we did, get over this, and life is different, and life is somewhat more like we have known before. Which of the things that you think will become more mainstream activities, and which do you think are likely to disappear? But more importantly, which do you think will stay? I think that would be the more useful thing to think about, isn't it? So, as an example, I might think that, online learning in a more general sense will become probably more mainstream. You can't expect universities which have suddenly gone online to dump everything and then go back to where they were. Or do you think that's going to happen? What do you think is going to happen? 2021, 2022, thereafter?
Ladies first here.
You go, Kurt. Oh, Anna, go ahead, Anna.
I thought it was the cue. I would like to start by talking about what is going to likely to become mainstream. I think the extensive use of video conferencing systems will stay, but not to replicate the real-time communication that happens in the traditional classroom. Because there was the comfortable place to go. Okay, we cannot be there in the same physical space, so we're just going to mimic what happens in the physical space, in the real face-to-face interaction. I think instead video conferencing systems, and I broadly speaking as video conferencing systems, we may even come out with a different name for these kinds of systems, will be used to enhance communication. And these systems affordances will be fully utilized. Right now, we're just using the audio and the video, and we just, it's a talking head mostly, but examples of how to fully use those affordances are use the live closed captions. In a class, in a typical classroom, we don't have closed captioning from our teachers, but in these kind of environments, we can have live closed captions, which can help with the language and the communication. Since I'm not English, my English is not my first language, I rely on closed captioning extensively to understand other languages. And in a classroom, that cannot happen, but it can happen in a video conferencing setup. Also, the video conference will allow the integration of augmented video applications like Snap Camera right now. And that will allow the use of filters and image manipulation. And those apps allow us, the teacher and the students and the learning community, to use other ways to express our ideas and our points of view that will not rely exclusively on the written word or on me speaking to a camera. So I believe the affordances of video conference systems will be used fully and become mainstream. And that will push the systems to evolve as well. And that's kind of, I know I'm very enthusiastic about video conferencing systems right now. Yeah. I don't really like the term. I would like to change the term, and maybe the audience will have suggestions for a different way to call it, because video conferencing is very limiting.
Could I come in with a reflection there, Anna? I really agree with what you've just said about how, as educators, we will start using these systems alongside our teaching. So, for example, at the OU this year, we normally do face-to-face induction for our doctoral students but we've not been able to do that this year. So we used Microsoft Teams asynchronously before induction to sort of get students communicating online before the start of term and for, uploading files about their induction. And then we used it actually during induction synchronously with the live sessions. And we've actually said, even when the induction will take place face-to-face in future years, we would like to use Teams again in that pre-induction setup. So I totally agree with what you're saying, that we will start using these tools more, even when we are doing our face-to-face teaching.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. When I was reading Christine, your work, I thought, here's an innovative way that we're not so familiar with of using video. I mean, Curtis' paper is also related. So when I was looking for themes, cross-cutting themes, and I thought that's where I thought, Christine, your work was quite relevant. How else can we use video as opposed to just presenting content?
As opposed to just presenting. Yeah, and also, I mean, on that question, what's there to stay? I would have thought recordings are there to stay, and at the moment, of course, all the students are sitting at home listening to recordings. It's just most of the recordings are just lectures. No, they're monologues, they're instructivist. No, they are not. So, so that was my paper, trying to do a little bit to move this forward and thinking a bit about the student perspective and how the student perspective could be brought into these recordings, and that's not happening that much yet at all. But I do think that recordings are there to stay, and that lecturers are building up sort of capabilities on making them. So everybody's used to now being recorded. Also, people make their own screencasts and things. So these capabilities are being built up. So I think a next step would be to somehow bring in the student voice, the student perspective, to turn them into dialogues rather than just, one person speaking at others.
Absolutely. You active teachers like Curtis, I'm sure you're using, everybody's got a mobile phone, and recording is easy these days. You can get students to record and bring content in the classroom, as opposed to the teacher presenting content most of the time, all the time, isn't it?
Which brings us back to pedagogy, and that, the notion of, as Jon talks about, flipping the classroom, and many other things have existed for a long time under different words or different labels, but we will have much more banked in terms of content, enabling us to do more that is interactive with our students. And as these tools become more functional and we become more familiar with them, the notion of breakout rooms might take on a lot of different meanings for us. I underutilized the breakout rooms, to be honest, this past spring, and I've thought about a ton of different ways that they can be used. But I'm thinking not only about the tools out there, but about just the overarching systems that we have. Assessment will be something that I think will be significantly forever impacted, in that I saw a lot of instructors reflecting on articles in Inside Higher Ed and the Chronicle of Higher Ed, how they changed their assessment practices, how they had more opportunities for synthesis types of assignments, how they had more opportunities for students to turn in their assignments at different times, not have one set day in which if you turn it in or don't turn it in, you're going to die or not die. And so the flexibility within the system, I think, is going to be the big major change. Flexibility in terms of scheduling. We moved to online, in March, and all of a sudden when we meet, when you met with your students, it didn't matter what day, what time, all this stuff. Whereas before, it had to be this day, it had to be this time, it had to take place, all these must-dos. You put the must-dos in a hat, you bury it, it's time to bury all the must-dos. Yeah, and we all have chairs of our department we call Dr. No. No, you can't do this. No, you can't do that. It became, yes, you can. Yes, you can try this out. Yes, you should. In fact, we were encouraged to try different things out. And so if one semester you were encouraged to do it, and now again in the fall for almost a year, that won't go back to the old Dr. No kind of syndrome that we were all facing in the past. And so there'll be different ways of scheduling, different ways of assessing, different ways of taking attendance and accounting for students' time. And also there'll be a different form of respect for the field of distance learning as a whole. If we do what Jon's telling us to do, read Jon's article, and if we do 50% or even 35% of what Jon's hopeful we can do, I think there'll be a newfound respect for the entire field, which will help the society in the long run. Our field has societal implications. It's always had societal implications. It has had newfound societal ramifications and implications that some of us never dreamed possible in our lifetimes, and is now within our grasp. It's no longer to our grandchildren or our hopes for our students of our students, in effect. It's now possible today, you see. And so those are the things I see, along with the word active learning. I see that being something that's become more pervasive and more accepting and more discussed than ever before, even though it's been with us for decades, half a century or more, or a century with John Dewey. So those are the things I see as semi-permanent or systemic changes.
Yeah, that's exactly the point, Curtis, that, I was kind of ruminating about, thinking about, is that everything that you just said, we in the literature, we meaning the scholars in the open distance learning, flexible learning field, have been arguing for that kind of flexibility, that kind of openness, that kind of resource-based teaching and student or learning-centered approaches. But, you know, people wouldn't listen. People, oh, it's not going to work with us. It's not going to work here. It's not good enough, you know. The COVID-19 has got to push that hand a little bit, you know. So in some ways, those are the best of times that I'm talking about. And it kind of, you know, takes me to this other question, which Mark Brown has just posted. Mark, again, is from in Dublin right now, from the middle of the night. He says, what business models do you see emerging post-COVID-19? In many countries, governments do not fund online programs. And will this really change due to the crisis? Funding is arguably the #1 problem facing higher education around the world. The question of who pays is yet to be resolved in a sustainable and scalable way. Does anybody want to have a go at that?
Well, Mark's also asking whether promotion criteria and workload will change. I think this is a George question. I don't know.
Yeah.
I can try.
He's written on it, right?
I mean, I don't know if I had an answer, probably have more questions than answers, but I think this is the $1 million question. I think institutions of higher education were in trouble before the pandemic, and the pandemic has exacerbated this issue. In the US, public institutions receive approximately 10% of their funding from the state. So public is, you know, when 90% of your funding doesn't necessarily come from the public, you're that much of a public institution. So I don't see the federal and state funding levels in the US changing much in response to the pandemic, though I sure hope that they do. I personally am hopeful for more government support. I don't know if that's going to happen. I do see a number of new entrants, if you will, in the market. I know Mark is working on micro-credentials with large support from the Irish government, if I understand it well. So I think the system is sort of ready for change at different levels. There's those institutions that will do well regardless, the Ivy Leagues, so the prestigious ones that would have done regardless anyway. But, you know, there's institutions that serve the majority of our students that rely on, you know, things other than their endowment and things other than what the people with money support. So I don't know if that's an answer or not, but I think that for those people who are interested in exploring new sort of funding models and delivery approaches and educational models, the situation that we're finding ourselves in is sort of ready for new approaches.
Yeah. It's a similar kind of question that I had. My question 3, as a matter of fact, was around business models. And of course, business models will have to do with funding models. Money is obviously going to be tight. So I mean, having worked at Melbourne University, sort of, you know, very conventional campus-based university for about 13 years, and I'm inclined to think, how do you think, you know, places like Melbourne, Yale, Cambridge, Stanford are going to change? Are they likely to change the business models or the operational model?
Well, maybe they are changing for the moment. As you said in your theme setting some. The questions of evaluative questions are on hold at very least. Whether they are maintained after the crisis is over will tell us whether things are going to change or not. And I commend Kurt for being so positive about the situation and about the idea that the best of times can be preserved. If you'll allow me again to be a bit Dickensian, and perhaps it's a British thing to be pessimistic, or at least to see pessimistic issues as a devil's advocate would. The problem is, and I was in educational television from the very beginning in the 70s at the University of Liverpool. I emigrated to Canada at the end of the 70s. Suddenly, in the mid-90s, educational television, which had done so very well over 20 years in Europe and in America, suddenly administrators pulled the plug on it, in Britain at least. Educational TV studios in the British universities were summarily closed because they said they've not really ever been worth the money we spent on them. So educational television disappeared in the mid-90s in Britain, to a lesser extent over here, but it ceased to become an issue, a known commodity, television. And today, when we talk about video conferencing, we don't take into account any of the lessons learned from remarkable research in the 80s in the States, especially, about how to use educational television well. After the turn of the century, people started reinventing television, didn't they? As if it had never been ever heard of before. And I've said in some of my articles for the journal that if you analyze the reference lists, you will see whole articles which never really refer to anything earlier than the MOOC age. So in other words, the last 10 years only and nothing before that. And you see specific statements made by very prominent university presidents and the like to suggest that educational television and online learning are a new option which they in the mainstream are inventing from scratch. So there is no real respect being paid in the mainstream for all those good lessons and for the best of times we can see as a group that is involved in this field. My pessimistic attitude is that those new developments in online learning may well disappear the moment the pandemic's over. And when we look at business models, we might reflect on the ways in which the MOOC actually did very laudably reinvent online television, but in a really low-level way, back to the level of the 1970s. A camera in the back of a huge lecture theatre doesn't quite cut it. But that is what so many online courses that are commercially produced today provides. And I think business models might always be looking for that, might always take that attitude that university administrators in the mid-90s took, which is to just nix the media which are costing a bit of money and go down to the lowest level. We can see distance education universities around the world which only use online text conferencing, whereas they could easily afford to be doing some of the things that we're doing here today and don't. So I think one of the perspectives we saw raised by the lady from the Open University just now is the importance of the student's perspective. If the students keep television in the running by their use of it, and we often talk about students being far more expert in the use of online technologies like Zoom, if they continue to use and to press the use of educational television and video conferencing, the administrators and the business modelers might be compelled to maintain it. Otherwise, I think the best of times, which as Kurt has said, is within our grasp, could unfortunately slip from our grasp as the best of times often have in the past. So we have to keep alert, and the students should play a large role in this and should be listened to. Over.
Yeah, absolutely, John. There's so much wisdom there and experience embedded in that. And I've followed your career and work for a very long time. I mean, and one area that we haven't explored, which we can branch out into, is the use of technologies for development purposes, for social, political, economic development purposes. But we're so we're focusing on the formal education sector here. The point about student input is very important, and I think even though you say that some of this might disappear, but what if I were to suggest them, it's students, once they're more accustomed to this over the next year or so, continue to ask for it. So imagine you're a professor, you're teaching alongside other people, and someone like Curtis comes along and he's got his thrills and fancy gadgetry. And then down the hall, you are this guy who is not. How much of that kind of pressure is going to drive change in the conventional educational practice? I'm just wondering, I suppose I'm kind of suggesting that it will, but do you think it will or it wouldn't?
Are you asking me?
I think so.
I was busy reading Tom Rees's question, which is an important question. It also comes up in Justin Reich's new book from MIT, Failure to Disrupt. In this new book by Justin Reich from Harvard Press, he talks about this tinkering approach. If we're constantly tinkering, as Tom points out, we're not addressing serious problems in the field. And so Justin just sent me a signed copy. I got it in the mail yesterday, so I have to promote it a little bit. And I think Tom brings up an important point. He mentions this in the conclusion article to the current issue of ETR&D that I just edited, talking about we need, as a field, to be addressing serious problems, or we're going to be continuing to jump to evaluating, analyzing a series of technologies over time and not make a serious dent in terms of societal implications for education. And so, we might want to talk about his question. He says so much of the research in distance ed seems to be boutique rather than addressing serious problems that teachers and learners are experiencing day in and day out during this pandemic. And we have to maybe get serious. Instead of tinkering with little models and new technology, I think the high time for us to get serious about addressing these real problems, lack of engagement, motivation, and distance learning, rather than tinkering towards utopia, as Cuban's model talked about. We need to launch major, and by the way, I'm trying to hit the keys, but I didn't get the end of that. Let's see if I can get back to that question.
We need to launch major international collaborations akin to those that are going on in public health and medical science, and use the pandemic to engage in much more socially responsible research.
Yeah. So I think one place that is addressing problems in a bigger way is right there in Canada, near you, John, and near you, George, is the Commonwealth of Learning. And I also got this in the mail the other day from Sanjaya, who's a panelist with us here, Technology-Enabled Learning Policy, Pedagogy, and Practice. Sanjaya Mishra and Santosh Tanda. Veronica, who's a panelist, has a chapter in here, many other people do. I highly recommend this book and anything from the Commonwealth of Learning. Go to col.org, and they've got a series of articles addressing, blended learning and MOOCs and open education and technology-enhanced learning and other things. And they're offering trainings. The Commonwealth of Learning is offering training around the world for free to get people ramped up in Malaysia and India and so forth. They're having mobile learning for farmers in India and Africa, MOOCs via text messages. They are doing the type of work that Tom Rees is getting at, attacking serious problems that people have and scaling the technology in an affordable way for them to do that. And so col.org. Thank you, Sanjaya, for your lovely book that arrived. I hope you're still with us. And yeah, but someone else want to address this question that Tom raised?
Anna?
I would like to just add to the conversation. I've been having this conversation with Kurt and Tom for a long time now. But I think the pandemic and what we're going through right now really accelerates innovation. Innovation was about to happen or is about to happen in our field, but what we're living now really accelerates that. The debate needs to evolve from comparing formats of teaching and learning to find out which one is the best, or questioning or getting suspicious about any approach to learning and teaching that does not look exactly the conventional campus-based education. Into a debate about which are the teaching and learning approaches that respond to students' needs. As John was mentioned, I put a big mark on my paper here. Students should be listened to, and to address the real societal challenges. I don't believe we'll get out of this pandemic if nations and peoples will not, if they don't work collaboratively, we're not going to get out of this. I think, and I'm optimistic too, so my apologies, John. I believe this is the time to come together. And the debate is not about how good online learning is or not, but is that debate about the reliability of online learning is going to be overpowered by the debate of the quality and the need of a conventional college learning experience. That needs to evolve. And I truly believe it's already evolving. Maybe we know in 10, 20 years from now, we might ending up coming back 10 years. So it's just, but right now, what we are learning, all this suffering, the death, the anxiety, the stress cannot be in vain. And I believe that the transformation is already here. That's kind of what I wanted to share and build on what you've discussed so far. Thank you.
It's always good to speak in positive terms. I do realize the flip side of that as well. One of the things that I wanted to talk about in the last sort of 5 or 10 minutes that is left is what more can we do? Of course, there's a lot we can do, but I was particularly thinking about, Tom's question and articulation of what we should be doing is very, very closely related to what I was thinking along the lines of what, journals in the field and scholarly outputs like doctoral programs in the field and research in the field ought to be doing. You wouldn't be surprised to know that I'm like other journals receiving an exponential growth in the number of articles that have something to do with COVID. How did we do this year? How did COVID have to do with this? And you know what? Within 24 hours, those articles are rejected, I'm sorry to say, because they haven't really taken any serious attempt at any of the sorts of things that we are talking about, how to leverage technology and educational processes, given the challenges that we've been presented with. But they're quick to tell you what we did, how did we do it in one small program or one small university, and you would want to publish that in international fora. Well, it's not going to get published if any respectable journal. So the question that I have for all of you in these final minutes, if you can each one have a go at it, is what can we as professionals do and professional organizations do to set us, to help us, to help us get onto the correct path. I know, you've already said some of that, but perhaps, one final comment from each one of you would be useful.
I'm happy to go first there. So one thing that we've been doing at the Open University is on our free open learning course, we've been doing courses on transitioning from face-to-face to online learning. And I think, as John said at the beginning, sort of, not all educators are, accessing and reading these journals. So it's important for us to share our expertise in other formats and other accessible and open formats. So I know the Open Learn course that the OU does has been really popular in that respect.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Anyone else?
I'll jump in. I think that what we could be doing that would be helpful would be to seek a place at the table where some of the decisions are made about the future of our institutions. Given the expertise that we have, I think we can be quite informative and actually carve hopeful paths for our futures and our students' futures and our society's future. And we often fail to do that either because of systemic issues that prevent us from being at the table, like for instance, early assistant professors need to work sort of on their publications as opposed to being rewarded for more important work that they might be doing. This speaks to what Tom is talking about. But I think we have valuable insights, and if we don't seek a place at that table, those seats are taken up by people who might not necessarily have the expertise or might have other values that they might promote that might be antithetical to sort of bright futures that I think we should be striving towards. And this speaks to some of the issues that Mark is raising around the edtech industry and so on. And just to make that I guess a practical example, around March, there was a push by many institutions or individuals to sort of embrace proctoring tools for continuity, right? But those tools may not necessarily have sort of a good place in our future, but if they get adopted and embedded in the systems that we're using today, then they might become the norms in the systems that we have tomorrow. So individuals that I think should be speaking up about those systems, people like us, should be people who do that kind of work, who say, yeah, there's a system that we shouldn't be inviting in our universities because it promotes mistrust and distrust and so on.
Yeah. Thanks, George. Anyone else?
Yeah, but also I think somehow attracting, because I think Kurt was saying earlier, those people, they don't read this journal, for example, but I think people are getting more interested and it's becoming more relevant to them now to read things that somehow have online learning in their title. So I think just attracting a bigger readership as well to journals like this one and to, publications like, I'm thinking about Ana-Paula here, who wrote about, Zoom and Microsoft Teams, and she compared these, and everybody's interested in that and everybody's been doing that. But what they haven't been doing, they haven't been connecting this with learning theory. They only thought about, which one's cheap or which one, can have more students for longer. And they did not think about sort of the learning theory that goes with the online technology. So to attracting more people and getting more people to read this kind of literature, where you look at the pedagogy and at the technology, I think that would really move people's thinking forward as well.
Yeah, I think, and certainly I have plenty to say about that, and I don't want to say that publicly, but Anna and I know the issues that reviewers had with that paper. And I think there's a bit of a mindset amongst ourselves that I think we need to be working at, because of the baggage that we carry on what is publishable and what is not publishable. With some of the stuff that we are doing right now, for example, these sorts of reflections, people might think that there's no place for this kind of stuff in a scholarly journal, and what is a research article, so to speak. But Jon Baggaley and I know that the over the years, to the kindness of Jon, by publishing these kinds of things, we have really made the journal. Actually, you'd be surprised how many more people read these reflections than the actual peer-reviewed. Well, all of them are peer-reviewed, but research articles, isn't it? You know, and I certainly believe that there should be in a journal those kinds of opportunities, which is what I've been trying to do with distance education. Not to diminish the importance of those data-driven research articles. I mean, there's room and place for that as well, and we've been trying to do that along.
Well, that relates to my suggestion, but I think Anna wanted to make one before me. Anna, did you have?
I do have a suggestion, but I think distance education is kind of already following it. I think I look at these scholarly outlets as some of them are going to, they're going to be lost in the midst of the changes that we are living right now. And one way I believe that in my work is to really shorten the submission, review, and the publication times. There's no way when everything is happening that we're conducting a study or research on the changes that are happening now with our learners, with our parents, with our schools, that only going to come to fruition maybe in 18 months. In 18 months, who knows what happened to us? So really short, we need to gain that perspective that the process of review and the timelines, they really need to change. Otherwise, people are going to read blogs, they're going to view YouTube's videos about these topics, they're going to come to these webinars, and the last thing they're going to do is to read the articles on the print version about a study that happened 24 or 36 months ago. That kind of was my reflection.
No, that is a very good point.
So Sam,
a quick point, Sam. Sorry, carry on, Kurt.
I noticed that this issue has 76,000 words and the reflection pieces are about 3,000 words approximately. Some are 5, some are 2. So if you did a whole 3 special issues just on reflection pieces, and you had the first one where the article, you had 20 different countries where every article was written, a reflection paper was written jointly by a policymaker, a practitioner, and a researcher. So you have the 3 have to work together. You have a researcher in K-12 space, school space, a policymaker, and you have a teacher. And then you do have the second issue at the higher ed level, another 20 countries, and you get an administrator, a researcher, and a student maybe, or an instructor. And then the third one in lifelong learning, you get someone from continuing studies and outreach education or extension, you get someone in workplace learning, and then maybe an employee, and you have 20 reflection pieces there from 20 different, you have a lot more interesting things to talk about and write and be written about, and you'd have people, you'd be forcing policymakers and corporate workplace people to work with the researchers and the practitioners. You'd get a whole series of interesting ideas that could spring from that kind of forced contributions instead of just researchers work together and just, the policymakers work together to integrate, and you have a theme around that. Just an idea that sprung in my mind as people were talking.
No,
well,
great idea.
That's very, very true what Kurt just said. That policy of collaboration is precisely what made Sesame Street capable of surviving 50 years. There was collaboration between the producers and formative evaluators, which created most unexpected formats within that program, which created ways of simplifying things to the level of the preschool child. But that level of approach was inspired and didn't last and didn't catch on, unfortunately, in other places. But there's one point that you might be able to work on, Sam. I've had requests from 2 universities to circulate this current article I've written for the journal to all the staff of the universities. Well, I can't give them permission to do that, can I? Because of that 50 issue limit that the publisher imposes. if I were to send, say, yes, send it to 1,000 people at your university, I'd be sued by Taylor and Francis. Maybe wouldn't be impossible for you to work on that with them to get them to free up those regulations in situations such as this, where the articles need to be widely circulated and accessed by university staff at large.
George might have something to say about that, because the publishers have a thing called the Green Open Access, which means that over a certain embargo period, I think it's usually, I don't know, a month or two, I have to look into that, that a pre-published copy of that issue of the paper can be distributed. Hey, George, I think, George, you've done that, right, already?
So each publisher sort of has a different embargo period, but what we each have is copyright over our own work, which is the article that we submit to the journal prior to publication. So at any point in time, you can exercise your right to post that anywhere and send it to anyone. Again, it's not the final, but it is as close to the final as could be.
Yeah.
And I think that's one way to approach this. But yeah, I would wholeheartedly support what Jon is talking about around opening up further avenues of access via the publisher.
I mean, I've just for a bit of reflection on that point. We've had this conversation with publishers for over many years and months. I mean, you can understand that they are in the money making business. They are trying to make money as well, but not entirely for their own benefit. Some organizations actually survive. Classic point is the Open Distance Learning Association of Australia. The membership of the organization is so small, and I'm sure there are other organizations around the world like that, that the income that the journal brings keeps the organization going, so that the organization can do other kinds of things for its membership. So the issue is a lot more complicated, than that. I mean, like the Eurodol, for example. Okay, Athabasca University supports financially the production of Eurodol. So Eurodol can be open access because the university puts up the money for the publication of the journal, whereas association-based journals aren't able to do that from membership fees. If that were the case, organizations like the Open and Distance Learning Association will not be able to support the journal or die itself because of no subscription base or small subscription base. But the point is taken, and this is a conversation that the publishers are aware of. So they have made some options available, like the Jon, in your case, you could send out a pre-published copy, if not the final copy, to those people who are asking for it.
Pre-published isn't quite as impressive to them. I don't think they might show any interest in something which didn't have the formal imprimatur of yourself and the Journal Association. But I take your point. But just one other point. I just remembered that only yesterday I received a very magnanimous email from an open access publisher. I forget which one it was because I immediately deleted it when I read that my next article, which is for a British journal, can achieve open access as long as I pay $3,700. Well, it's only 1,000 words. I don't know if that was a scam, but there are these systems which are giving open access a tremendously bad and negative name.
Oh yeah. I've had those flattering emails as well. People say you're an accomplished researcher, author. Would you send your articles to us? And then you find out that when you do, then you have to pay whatever number. So I thought, yeah, right.
Which
Anyway,
so I think, it speaks back to sort of Mark's point, right? What is a business model that makes sense, that sort of distributes the knowledge that we generate that may support our systems, but doesn't exploit, authors or readers or institutions?
Yeah.
We're exploited all the time as it is. Every time we write a book chapter for one of these places, then they put it not only in one book, they have it in a second book that they plop it in as best of kind of thing. So they're raking money on our thoughts and ideas, I must say. By the way, I have to go soon to talk to Ron Ostin students in York University in Toronto in a minute or two. So,
let me bring this to a close on that one, because we're way past time anyway, and we're way past bedtime in the UK. So, I with those words, I thank you very much for your indulgence. Every one of you, and all the participants were hanging in their beautiful comments. That I would love to go and have a look at that. A video recording of this will be pasted on the website, so you can send it to other people as well. It's not that sunny. I'm sure it's getting wintry in the basement in Indiana, in Bloomington, Indiana. Kurt, thank you very much, everyone, and thank the participants. Thank you very much for your contributions. I look forward to your engagement in the journal. Bravo. Goodbye. Good night.
Good night, everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Bye-bye, Antonina.
Oh yes, I should have acknowledged her contributions and everyone else who work on the journal. So I'm sorry about that. Anyway, John, thanks for mentioning that.
Bye-bye, Sam.
Okay, mate. You're okay, John?